Today we're going to talk about directional terms. Directional terms are used in conjunction with regional terms to help and people like anatomists and doctors know where something is relative to other structures. The first two terms we're going to go over are superior and inferior. So superior has synonyms. Cranial or cephalad mean the same thing in the human body. It means towards the head end or the upper part of a structure. So above is kind of the major thing to remember. So if something is superior, it's above a different structure. The word inferior has a synonym also. So caudal and inferior mean the same thing. And it means away from the head end or towards the lower part of a structure. So it's going to be below things. So in this diagram, you can see anytime something is superior, it is towards the head end of the body. Anytime something is inferior, it's towards the tail end or the foot end of the body. And you can use this to describe where things are relative to each other. So an example of using this term, you could say, for example, that the sternal region is superior to the manus region because it is closer to the head end. And then you could also say that the patellar region is inferior to the brachial region because it is found closer to the foot end of the body. The next two terms we're going to talk about are ventral and dorsal. So the term ventral means towards or at the front of the body or in front of. So in humans, this is on the belly side. So think of where your abdomen is, that's the ventral side of your body. And then the dorsal side of the body is also referred to as posterior, and it's towards the back side of the body or behind. So on your back, if you think of where a shark's dorsal fin is, that's the dorsal side of the body. So in this diagram, we can go over a couple examples. So the ventral side, again, is towards the front side of the body. It's also referred to as anterior. The posterior side of the body is towards the back side of the body, also known as dorsal. So when we use these words in a sentence, for example, we can say that the nasal region is ventral or anterior to the occipital region because it's on the front side of the body. Alternatively, we can say that the scapular region is dorsal or posterior to the ocular region because it's on the back side of the body or further to the back of the body relative to the ocular region. We have three terms to go over on this slide. So we're going to talk about medial, lateral, and intermediate. So medial means towards or at the midline of the body. So things that are medial relative to other structures are closer to the midline or the center of the body. Lateral means away from the midline of the body. So that means that they're going to be towards further to the right or further to the left than center. And then the word intermediate means between a more medial and more lateral structure. So structures that are intermediate are always between two other locations on the body. So before we review these terms, remember that the midline is the middle of the body. That's why it's called midline. Then in this diagram, we have the medial structures, or the word medial, which means things are towards the midline. That's why the arrow goes this way. And then structures that are lateral are away from the midline of the body. And then in an intermediate structure, it's going to be between two different structures. So we can go over examples for each of these. All right, now we can go through some examples. So, for example, for a medial structure, you could say that the umbilical region is medial to the coxal region because it's closer to the midline of the body. And then for lateral structures, you could say that the acromial region is lateral to the lumbar region because it is further away from the midline of the body. And then for an intermediate structure, you could say that the scapular structure is intermediate to both the acromial region and the vertebral region because it sits between those two areas of the body. Our next two terms are proximal and distal. So proximal and distal both refer to the limbs. So you're not going to use proximal and distal to describe where something is on the trunk of the body or on the head, but you will use it to describe where something is relative to each other on your arms or your legs. So proximal means that something is close to the origin of the body part or point of attachment of the limb to the body trunk. The word distal means that it's farther from the origin of the body part or the point of attachment of the limb to the body trunk. So this is one where we're definitely going to go over some examples. So first we'll go over the word proximal. So the word proximal means that you're closer to the point of attachment. So the arm attaches to the body right around here. So you could use the word proximal to describe something that is closer to where the arm attaches. So in this example, we can say that the brachial region is proximal to the antebrachial region because the brachial region is closer to where the arm attaches to the body. You could also say that the antebrachial region is proximal to the manus region because the antebrachial region is closer to the point of attachment than the manus region is. Moving on to the term distal, you could say that the popliteal region is distal to the femoral region because it's further from the point of attachment to the leg, which is around the hip region. You could also say that the pedal region is distal to the popliteal region because it's, again, further away from the point where the leg attaches to the body. Now we're going to talk about the terms superficial and deep. Superficial means towards or at the body's surface. Deep means away from the body's surface or more internal. So to review these terms, you could say that your skin, for example, is superficial to your muscular tissue because your skin is closer to the surface of your body than your muscular tissue is. You could also say that your bones are deep to your skin because your bones are further to the interior of your body than your skin. Next, we're going to talk about body planes and sections. So a sagittal section divides the body into right and left parts. If a sagittal section goes right through the center of the body, that's known as a mid-sagittal section or a median section, and that divides the body into an equal left and right half. So that means that that would go right down your midline, so kind of through your nose, sternum, belly button, etc. A frontal section, also known as a coronal section, divides the body or an organ that you're looking at into an anterior and posterior part. So that divides something into a front and back part. And then a transverse or cross section divides the body into superior and inferior parts or an upper and lower part. So in this diagram, you can see the difference between these sections. So again, a median section, if it goes right through the middle, it's called a mid-sagittal section, and it divides the body into a left half and a right half. If you have a frontal or coronal section, that's going to divide the body into a front half, which is on the front of the body, and then a back half, which we can't see because it's behind the body. Then you have finally a transverse section, and that's going to divide the body into a superior section and an inferior section. These three different sections are important when describing especially images because you can look at the body from different sections and then see organs and things like that and structures differently with each section. So like these are all sections of the kind of abdominal and thoracic cavity of a person, but you can see in a median or mid-sagittal section, you can see like the cross section of the vertebral column, and then you can see where it is relative to the front side of the body and the back side of the body. If you look at the frontal or coronal plane, that allows you to see what both the right and left halves of the body look like. So in this diagram, you can see the right lung and the left lung and the heart, because you can see the entire width of the body from left to right. And then if you look at a transverse section, you can see how things travel through the thoracic cavity or the abdomen, for example. So here you can see like a view from above where the liver is relative to the aorta, which is a large blood vessel, relative to the spinal cord, which actually is quite a bit further into people's bodies than they realize, because there's a lot of skin and muscle that covers that, and then relative to like organs like the spleen and the stomach. Your body also has several different cavities where different organs reside, so we'll go over some of those. Your dorsal body cavities are the ones that are considered towards the back side of your body. So those are your cranial cavity, which houses the brain, so that's inside of your skull, and the spinal cavity, which houses the spinal cord. The spinal cavity is actually made up of many different bones. It's your vertebrae that are stacked on top of one another, and they have a hole that goes through each vertebrae. And when those holes all line up, it provides a place for your spinal cord to reside. And then ventral body cavities include the thoracic cavity. So that's the space inside of your rib cage, and it houses your heart and lungs and some other endocrine organs and things. And then you also have the abdominopelvic cavity, and that houses your digestive system, urinary system organs, and reproductive organs. The abdominopelvic cavity can be further divided into two cavities, and those two cavities are referred to as the abdominal cavity and the pelvic cavity. So in this diagram, you can see how all of these different cavities are divided up. So the cranial cavity, again, is what houses your brain. And then the spinal cavity, you can see, is made up of all of these different bones, right? Those are all different vertebrae. And each bone allows the spinal cord to pass through it, and so it forms this cavity that runs the length of the thoracic cavity and part of the abdomen. And then the thoracic cavity is here, so this is where your heart and your lungs reside. And then it's separated from the abdominal or abdominopelvic cavity by the diaphragm. That's the structure right here, and that's the muscle that allows you to breathe. Then the abdominopelvic cavity, so that's this structure, can be subdivided into the abdominal cavity and the pelvic cavity. The abdominal cavity is where most of your digestive system resides, and then the pelvic cavity is where you'll find more of your reproductive system, and then like your lower bowel. You'll notice that some of these body cavities have more protection than others. So some organs have a lot more bony structure surrounding them. So like your cranial cavity that houses your brain has a lot of bony structure that is able to protect your brain because your skull surrounds the whole thing. Even your vertebrae has quite a bit of protection because the spinal cord goes through so many different bones. The thoracic cavity also has quite a bit of protection because your rib cage surrounds the entire cavity. And when you get to the abdominal cavity, this is probably your most vulnerable cavity because it has a bony structure on the back. Your vertebrae are able to protect some of those organs, but on the front side of your abdomen, this is just a muscular layer that holds everything in place. And so there's not a bony section on your abdomen. Your pelvis is also quite protected because you have, or your pelvic cavity rather, because you have all of those organs sitting inside of your bony pelvis, which is a very strong bone. Finally, we'll go over some of the different ways that the abdomen is subdivided. These are terms that would be used potentially just to describe like where an injury occurs or things like that. So sometimes your abdomen is divided up into 4 quadrants. So there's the right upper quadrant, which is where things like your gallbladder and liver reside. And then the upper left quadrant is more like stomach and some of your small intestine. The right lower quadrant is going to be where the start of your large intestine is. This is your appendix if you have pain there. Could be appendicitis. And then the left lower quadrant is where your rectum begins. Sometimes instead of 4 quadrants, the abdomen is divided up into 9 quadrants. They are referred to as the right hypochondriac region, the epigastric region, the left hypochondriac region, the right lumbar region, the umbilical region, the left lumbar region, the right iliac or inguinal region, the hypogastric region, and then the left iliac or inguinal region. So again, these are terms we won't use that much in class, but it's good to know since they are used in some medical and anatomical applications.